Don't you find it insulting as you are making efforts to speak in English in front of us every day?
Mm-hmm. It is. I am a francophone, of course. I'm the Minister of French Language. I was born and raised in a francophone family, but I do my best to speak in English, to show some respect to our Anglophone community, and to respect the right to live in Quebec. So if I can speak in English, Monsieur Rousseau can speak in French.
Kind of walked him into that, didn't she? Kind of gave him that answer. That is, of course, Jean-François Robert. He is the language minister, reacting, of course, to Michael Rousseau yet again. James Mennie is standing by from the Montreal Gazette. So, Jim, Michael Rousseau got an apology this morning. Not a video, just a written apology. So what do you think?
Well, okay, before we go any further, because I mean, you do raise a good point with that clip, and that's one of the reasons I chose that clip to come in with, because that's Jean-François Robert, Minister of the French Language, who's saying, and he's quite right to say that. It's simple justice. If I can make an effort to speak English, and Monsieur Rousseau can make an effort to speak French. That said, this is the same Jean-François Robert who once said he was hearing too much English in downtown Montreal. So everyone take a deep breath and understand that everything has a context here. The quote that I really liked, and I never put two and two together on this, Pascal Derry, who is our employment minister now for the CAQ government, she used to be Air Canada's director of media relations under Rousseau. Oh. And today she said, we went through this 5 years ago when was the whole thing. Sorry, I've lived in Montreal for 15 years. You don't have to speak French. What a great city. And he says he promised to learn how to French. He did not do it. I think today the question is not asking ourselves whether he will learn French or not. I think he just doesn't want to learn French. That's it. And I think that really sums up this thing. Yes, we are in that purely politicized shell that a lot of listeners were complaining about yesterday. I don't think we were there yesterday, but of course we're there now. And things are just going to go downhill from here. But the fact of the matter is, if there was one lesson that came through in all this, and by the way, lest we forget, the gallant Mr. Rousseau not only addressed nothing more than a written statement, like he didn't even defend himself in English with using English words. He issued a bilingual written statement at the crack of dawn today. Right. So in other words, let's get this in the cycle early. Let's get it flushed through and run the cycle, and hopefully people will forget about it. And obviously that's not happening. But as I say, I think the one lesson that may become, and that might be the silver lining here, Aaron, when we talk about, Air Canada, apparently, and a lot of people seem to have forgotten that, Canada, until further notice, includes Quebec and it includes Francophones. And it is subject to the Official Languages Act. And if people get their noses out of joint with the expectation that that the people who run the place should be able at least to sort of even rudimentally express themselves in either official language, well, too bad, so sad. That's where we live.
And people bring up the point, Jim, and I don't want to belabor this. The idea if this was another airline based out of Toronto and something would have happened, this obviously would have got no oxygen whatsoever. So this is a uniquely Quebec issue, but of course, you look around the rest of the country, and by the way, including internationally, right? The story's been picked up. Yeah. I know it was in the New York Times. It doesn't necessarily, or does it, shine a light on Quebec? I
will bet you folding money, my friend, that if a Toronto-based airline went through this horrible crisis and lost a Francophone employee, even if it wasn't a verbal message of condolence, I'll bet you right off the bat it would be done in both official languages.
I think you're probably right.
I'm telling you right now. That's simple common sense. That's from the school of not dropping an anvil on your foot every second step you take. A school of public relations.
I'm not going to ask you what's going to happen. I'm asking you what you think might happen here. You've heard all these people come out and understand politically that, of course, that gains eyeballs in Quebec. He should resign. He should be fired. What do you think actually is going to happen here?
The brand of Air Canada certainly has been tarnished by this entire thing. I think it's in the hands of the board of directors now. They got to turn around and say, listen, we're paying this guy $12 million a year. And you know what? This is the second time he's really put us on the map for all the wrong reasons. And maybe we should really think about, or perhaps as you and I discussed yesterday, make sure that Air Canada has a French-speaking voice, no matter who it is, and who's someone who's high enough up on the food scale that they'll be able to say, "Listen, okay, they're doing their due diligence."
Really?
But this guy is a disaster.
And you think that would be enough for them to say, "Here's our new guy, Charles, whoever it happens to be. He's now the voice of of French at Air Canada." And that doesn't get Michael Rousseau off the hook. Then it just becomes, don't you think, everyone else looking at them going, "Oh, really? That's the best you could do?"
I'm not exactly. I'm not saying that it's smart. I'm saying if it was the board of directors really wanted to make this go away, they'd make him go away. It's as simple as that. There's no second chance here or third chance in this case. But the fact is, as one columnist at La Presse pointed out today, this is not a matter of language. It's a matter of money. And I guess they figured he's making them enough money, so you know what? We'll cut him some more slack. We'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they'll turn around and say, no, we don't need this. But certainly, I don't expect the l'affaire Rousseau to survive past the end of this week. But once again, it's really going to depend on what the official languages committee asks him, how he reacts to that, and whether indeed it'll get that far. Whether indeed he'll still be in his position by the time he gets to be in front of this committee and get grilled on this very issue.
Ain't that going to be something, that one? Mm-hmm. All right, Jim, Bill 21, the hearings are officially, of course, over because it was 4 days. I want to ask you if you saw the reaction yesterday. This is the one that's got a couple of eyebrows being raised. When the Chief Justice, Richard Wagner, kind of took a shot at Julius Gray, or not necessarily at him, but saying something about the English community in Quebec is not uniquely diverse. What was this all about?
His contention, it was that in his brief, Maître Gray suggested that the provisions of the notwithstanding clause were really focused on the English-speaking community because of its galaxy of different denominations and so on and so forth. At which point, Richard Wagner, the Chief Justice, and I'm quoting from reports that I've read, Aaron. I did not hear the exchange, so I'm just telling you what I've been able to glean from this. He basically said, I think it might be, it might be a bit scandalous to suspect that, the Anglophone community is the only one that's diverse in Quebec. Right. And there may be a point there as well. But all that said, I don't know. They have le droit de réserve. In other words, in English, it means the sort of the option of keeping your mouth shut. Perhaps the Chief Justice should have exercised that option. But I don't think we should be distracted from the much larger question that is being discussed in this case. And it's not about Quebec policy. It's not about hijabs. I'm not overstating the case, Aaron. This is a question of what kind of a country are we going to live in? Because, yes, Wagner may have made that comment about Julius Gray's brief, but on the other hand, he also wondered, with the notwithstanding clause, if a tyrant, and I believe that was his word that he used, if a tyrant came to power, even at the provincial jurisdiction, could he or she suddenly, negate every single right, every single value that exists in Quebec and Canada? And that is a very germane question. You're talking, better than anybody else, you're talking to a guy who, ever since this whole issue began, even before Bill 21 was adopted and we knew the notwithstanding clause was going to be used, this is not about the fundamental right of freedom of religion. This is about a politician being able to switch off any right when he or she feels like it or when the polls tell them to do it. That's a very dangerous place to be. And I really think that as much as, there's going to be the PQ is going to spin this as, our identity is at stake and so on and so forth. I think the fundamental nature of how we live in this country, of how we are governed in this country, of our equality or lack of same before the law, before governments. This is what is at issue here. And if it goes back to 1982, as far as I'm concerned, this deal with the devil that people like Pierre-Elliott Trudeau made in terms of the notwithstanding, I'd rather go down in history as the guy who brought back the Constitution. So we'll throw this in. If it ever happens, you can use the notwithstanding clause if the courts are going too far. And now it's being interpreted as saying, they want to go back to the days before the notwithstanding clause. No, this is part of the Constitution, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but this is it. This without proper attention being paid to it until now, we basically have a void, we're literally prohibited by law, codicil on every so-called article of the Charter of Rights. And in other words, the Charter of Rights is not worth the paper it's written on so long as this clause exists. To change it, you would have to actually have, national unity, constitutional amendment, 7 provinces, 50% of the population. Yeah. Good luck with that. But it's not. This is not a Quebec story. The notwithstanding clause has been used in Ontario in a very controversial manner. We had Pierre Poilievre suggesting that if he became prime minister, if he wanted to push through his tough on crime agenda, he would not think twice about using the notwithstanding clause in a preemptive manner. You should be. I mean, maybe not. Maybe people love the idea. But
but therein lies the concern. I think you're making an excellent point, right?
This is the part that scares the hell out of me. I mean, I don't know. The person you and I have never heard of, maybe out there right now, who's going to turn around and say, you know what? There's way too much radio here in Quebec, so let's pull the plug on that. I know it's a federal thing, but you know what? Notwithstanding, blah 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 blah.
Exactly.
It's the possibilities are horrifyingly endless.
I will say one thing, now that the hearings are in fact over, for all the talk about this going in, giving in all the political, opportunities for some of the parties, at least now that it's over, we're not going to have them talking about this on a regular basis because there is no decision coming. We've talked about that before, in all likelihood for months, and that means after the provincial election. So
absolutely. And honestly, but hey, listen, let's not sell the PQ short, of course. They will campaign on, it looks like if it turns down and you're not a Quebec nation, and these guys turn around and say, you can't tell people you can't suspend the rights of people who we say are threatening your identity. Yeah. We got a problem.
I think that's going to wear thin. I don't think, this is over.
I hope you're right. So, really, because I am so exhausted. And not just the PQ, the CAQ have been traded on this for 8 freaking years. Okay? And I can only hope that the same disdain that's being expressed now for the Coalition Avenir Québec actually surfaces for the Parti Québécois, which actually used to be about something. It used to be a party of rights. Yes, it wanted independence, but it was a social democrat. It is nothing compared to what it used to be. And I think a lot of our listeners will remember the days of different PQ leaders who spoke a very, very different tune when it came to talking about Quebec.
We will leave it at that. James Mennie over at the Montreal Gazette. Jim, thank you.
I'm Luke Wilson. Join me each week for Film Never Lies. Since retiring from the NFL, I've had a lot on my mind, and now I've got my own show. So if you're tired of lazy takes, if you want honest conversations, join us each week. Film Never Lies, available on all TSN platforms and the iHeartRadio app.